Hello everyone, and welcome to another video by Models by Hand. In this video we're going to go over the A-4E Skyhawk that I recently put together. It's an old kit from back in the 60s, and it's the only kit I've ever seen that comes with battle damaged parts that you have the option to put on. I thought it was so cool when I saw the original box. I had to have my hands on it. Okay, so let's get right into it. Here is the finished model, and I really focused on weathering and the damage effects, as the model itself is pretty simple, doesn't have a lot of parts, and I wanted to add a little bit of flair, so I created a set of Coors cans. I stole the idea from helicopter pilot photos from Vietnam. Alright, let's get into how we did this. This is the box from 1969 when the kit was brand new. It's by a company called International Machines Corporation, or IMC. And this kit went through a couple of iterations throughout the years, but it took almost 30 years for Lindbergh to pick it up. These are the parts and part tree that come in the kit. You have an extra half of the fuselage that has the battle damage on it, or you have the two pristine halves. You have the tail fin that has battle damage, or you have the pristine tail fin. One of the engine ducts has battle damage, or the option to put in the clean one. And the diving brake, or the air brake, that has some battle damage on it, or you can build it with the pristine version as well. Like I said before, it's a very simple kit. There is no cockpit detail whatsoever. It's just a guy, and when you go to put him in there, he's just hanging on there by a thread, literally. On to assembly. The two halves fit together pretty well. There is a seam. That's not a big surprise there, considering the kit's from 1969. I figured the parts would fit a little sloppy, but they didn't. I was really impressed with the fit of the parts. You know, I'm not a big airplane building person, but I was happy with the level of detail of the rivets on the fuselage and all that. So I kept moving forward, just doing basic things by cleaning up seam lines and throwing her together. Here we have the body of the plane put together, and it shows the battle damage to the air brake, the tail wings, the engine. And when you move to the front, you have damage on the nose where the radar would be, and on the engine intake. And the other side of the plane is actually pristine and clean. There's no damage there. Once I got all the parts put together, it was time for priming. In this case, I was using the Krylon rattle can primer. Whenever I use the rattle cans, I like to heat up the can with hot tap water. I just fill up a small bucket with the hot tap water, let the can sit in the bucket for 5 minutes till it gets warm. After that, you immediately start spraying your parts, and the paint will lay down very flat, very nice. It's very cooperative when the paint is warm. All the rivet detail is still there, the battle damage is still there, and if you were to touch the model, it feels pretty smooth. You know, it's pretty impressive how good of a finish you can get out of that rattle can when you prep it right. I've never done pre-shading before, so this was a first for me. I took some Tamiya flat black paint, thinned it out, put it in my airbrush, and just tried to detail shade the areas where there's rivets or parting lines, wherever you'd have some kind of a ghost image when the plane is painted and in service. The point of doing the plane like this is you put down a white coat and then you do your black shading, so the final color of the plane is applied in thin light coats, so the shading can come through the thin coat. So you got to kind of believe in the process here. I've never done this before, so I just had that beautiful primer on and it looked great, and then I just made it look like a zebra. So I was kind of worried about it, but I had to believe in the process, and I was happy with the results. Now that the plane is all painted gray, I had to reshoot the battle damage areas, or the scorch mark areas. Here I used the Tamiya NATO black. It's not a pure black, it's almost like a very dark gray. And I just spritzed it on with the airbrush in the appropriate areas. When I started researching the Skyhawk, I came across several pictures of combat helicopters in Vietnam where the rocket pod was decorated like a can of beer. Apparently some enterprising mechanic over there decided to turn rocket pods into Coors, Budweiser, or Schlitz cans. I decided to try my hand at that at the small scale of this model. It's a mishmash of vectors and logos that I found on the internet. So to get the size, I just took scrap pieces of paper, wrapped them around the cans, and trimmed the paper so that they were the right size to wrap around the cans. I then measured this paper and scaled my design to that measurement, printed them out on the laser printer, and I went to attach the printouts to the cans. I used super glue. I put super glue on the first edge and then a couple of spots in the middle of the paper, and then wrapped it around the can very gently. And at the end, I just put super glue on the other side and tucked it in to that panel that holds the rocket pod, and it dried pretty well. After it dried, I just hit it with a couple of coats of matte varnish. Now that the plane is the right color and it has the shading and finally the battle damage, I decided to add a little bit of a bare metal effect by using a dry brush method with some silver paint. Once that was done, I shot the plane in clear gloss and let that dry for a couple of days, and then it was time for the decals. I was really dreading doing these because the original decals are from 1969 and they were unusable. They were yellow. I've been told that you could set the decals out on a window and the sun will bleach the decals clear again. I didn't want to wait for that, so I used the decals from the late 80s that the previous owner of the kit had purchased, and it was kind of a good idea. The decals were very thin, they're old, and they were prone to tearing. I had all kinds of trouble. If you look at the Marines logo on the tail fin, you know that the decals are ripped. I actually had to use stars and bars decals from another plane that I had laying around, and those went on very nice. But anything that got ripped or damaged, I decided to airbrush later with a spot of black to make it look like more battle damage, just to cover it up. Continuing on with the weathering of the fuselage, I decided to use dots of oil paint. I've never done this method before where you streak the oil paint down the length of the fuselage. And this is supposed to demonstrate either leaking hydraulic fluid or rust if the plane's made out of steel. Apparently this plane's made out of aluminum, so it's not rust. It's going to be leaking hydraulic fluid. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Anyhow, the process is pretty simple. You just take oil paint, it comes out of a tube, and this color that I have is burnt umber. You take a small brush and you just put little dots all over the fuselage. Then you take a large brush, dip it in some mineral spirits, and you take that brush and you move the brush over the surface of the plane across the dots you just made, and it generates streaks. And the more mineral spirits you have, the more the streak is going to be diluted. So you have a lot of control over this method. You just have to believe in it working when you try to do it. It will work. I used smoke and clear green paint from Tamiya to tint the canopy. I wanted to add some kind of a green effect to the front of the canopy for some heads-up display that they might have had. I'm not sure that's accurate, but it looks pretty cool. I also wanted to tint that glass because there is no detail in there. All you can see is a white pilot's helmet, and that's because I painted it white. The canopy also has a fuselage colored rail on it. And when I painted this with that sky gray and put it on the model with the weathering, it looked like it was a brand new canopy on an old torn up plane, which is not what we want. So I have these pigments from a company whose name I cannot pronounce. Abteilung 502. The tank builders use this stuff to make the tank treads look weathered, and I decided to pick up a set for my models, and I've used them on several of my builds. I've been very happy with them. So I just took a small dry brush and dipped it in this pigment and then just stippled it onto the canopy and blended it into the damage on the engine's air intake. Once the weathering was all done, I had to finish the plane in a matte clear coat. I chose to use a Vallejo matte clear, and I like to thin it down with water before I spray it with my spray gun, and that might have been a mistake because when I thinned it down and I mixed it, it basically turned into foam. I had to wait an hour and a half for the bubbles to pop, and then I could load it. The last touch on this kit is the plume of smoke coming out of the engine. So I just took a clear dowel, super glued some cotton balls to it and made it look like a plume of smoke. Loaded up the airbrush with some NATO black from Tamiya and just painted some lines on it so it looked like oil in the smoke. And then I just put it in the hole, and there you go. Now that the plane is all done, I wanted to have a bit of fun with the photography of the finished model. So I decided to make a composition. I took a picture of the model, found a picture of Vietnam online, and decided to combine the two into some kind of grainy looking gun cam footage. And this is the picture that I ended up using as the title slide for the YouTube video. Well, I really appreciate you guys watching the video. Thank you very much. If you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video. And if you appreciate what I'm doing here, give me a subscription. It would help out a bunch.